No, your eyes aren't deceiving you. The Mark II is back in the garage. Hello and welcome back to Project 380, and in this episode I'm installing an oil cooler. So firstly, why would you need an oil cooler? With a standard car with a standard engine, or a car that isn't seeing any abuse, like track time or drifting, you're probably not going to need an oil cooler. But for an engine that's going to see all the abuse, especially if it's forced induction, you're going to want an oil cooler. Oil is very important to the engine. If oil gets too hot, the oil is going to deteriorate, lose its viscosity, and then next thing you know, piston number 4 has made a hole in the bonnet, and the turbine from the turbo has reached the moon. So to help stop the oil seeing temperatures it really shouldn't see, we need an oil cooler. To install the oil cooler, we need an oil sandwich plate. Some of you may remember I fitted this Mocal oil sandwich plate with AN fittings before I put the engine in the car. But I've decided to go a different route. By the way, the intake is all off at the minute to make this a little bit easier to do and film, but I needed the intake manifold off for other stuff around here. So first things first, I need to get this old filter off and the Mocal sandwich plate, which typically you would do through the subframe there, or between the subframe and the radiator here from underneath. But since I've got the intake manifold off, my life is a lot more easy. This has had no oil in it, so I'm perfectly fine to use this again. I'll save that for later. This sandwich plate replaces the oil cooler, which was originally attached here, or oil warmer. I don't think it done a very good job, but you replace that with this sandwich plate, which has AN fittings in it, so you can lead some hoses to an oil cooler. But I've decided to get rid of the Mocal one and replace it with a Mishimoto one. And that's for one simple reason: it's got two 1/8 MPT ports, so I can add extra sensors. But before I install the sandwich plate, it needs a little bit of assembly first. The Mishimoto sandwich plate is also a thermostatic sandwich plate, which means it will only feed the oil cooler once the oil is up to temperature. It's a really good idea to have a thermostatic one rather than just a normal sandwich plate. Having your oil too hot is pretty bad, but beating on your engine with cold oil can be just as bad. So rather than the sandwich plate allowing the oil cooler to run all the time, it's only going to cool down the oil once the thermostat in the sandwich plate has opened. The sandwich plate has two MPT ports, one at the top and one at the bottom. Looking at the sandwich plate with the face that is going to attach to the block, we can see an oil galleyway here leading into the thermostat, where this MPT port leads into. So I'm going to remove that MPT bung and put an oil temperature sensor in there. This one's got two wires, and I've installed a waterproof connector on the end, so that can screw straight into that sandwich plate. I'm putting this in now to hopefully make it easier for me, rather than trying to do this while it's on the block. So this obviously measures the temperature of the oil at the sandwich plate, but what this can also do with certain ECUs is set safeties. So you can have a preset in your ECU to lower the timing and the boost until your oil is up to operating temperature, hopefully saving the engine. I purchased the sandwich plate and the oil cooler and the fitting kit from Boffy Racing. And in that kit, it includes the adapters to go in the sandwich plate with the sealing washers. So they could be screwed into the sandwich plate now. And then using the adapter in the kit, we can put this onto the block. I'm going to leave that fairly loose for now so I can orientate my pipes. You may have noticed the standard oil cooler is not there anymore. I removed that in a previous video. I'll pop it in a link right here. Go check that out to see how I removed it. Now, onto the oil cooler. I've chose a Motomech 19 row oil cooler, which is plenty big enough for my application. But now, I need somewhere to mount it. Within reason, you can mount it wherever you want. But the key thing you need is airflow. So we definitely want it at the front, ideally behind the bumper, unless you want to go full Buzazuku style and have the lines dangling out and everything in front of the bumper. You could install it between the radiator and the intercooler, or in front of the intercooler, to the sides. But for me, just like my power steering cooler that I installed, which has got loads of airflow through the deuce style bumper. I'm going to do the same this side with the oil cooler. It's going to get loads of airflow through the bumper, and it's not going to warm anything else up. If you put it with the radiator, the pair together can warm each other up a little bit, so I would prefer to put it right out of the way and have its own dedicated airflow. So just like the power steering cooler, I'm going to have to make some nice brackets to keep this oil cooler in place. Included in the oil cooler kit from Boffy Racing is some Mocal Universal oil cooler bracketry. But me being me, I've gone completely overboard and made a custom bracket out of stainless steel, which fits perfectly up in here. The oil cooler and the bracket installed on the car now, that's pretty secure. It's sitting really nicely in there. Plenty of room for the tyre to turn. Some nice access for the oil lines in there. I've test fitted the bumper and it's clearing all the bumper here and should have some nice airflow. But now we need to connect the oil cooler with the sandwich plate. And to do that, we've got some nice stainless steel braided hose. These are the hoses that are included in the kit, which are pre-cut to length with some nice crimped ends. The predetermined lengths of these hoses are actually to fit the oil cooler right at the front in the bumper. So if you are putting your oil cooler elsewhere, you may want to consider making your own hoses. So yes, I have put my oil cooler down here, but I have made this hose kit work for my situation. So I have added this metal bracket with an AN10 separator, which is going to hold the lines exactly where I want them. You'll see what I mean when it's installed. I'm going to run both these hoses from the sandwich plate between the steering column and the block, underneath the alternator, underneath the intercooler pipe and the anti-roll bar, and then come this side of the anti-roll bar between the chassis leg and the intercooler pipe, out of that little gap there, through my oil cooler bracket, and then to the oil cooler. So that's the oil cooler lines ran from the oil cooler through the chassis, out down here, attached to the radiator with a support bracket, and then to the sandwich plate on the block. I've only attached one line to the sandwich plate, and that's for a very good reason. When this engine does eventually start, it's not going to use this oil cooler until the engine is hot enough. So until the engine's hot enough, the lines and the oil cooler are completely empty. Which means when that thermostat does open up, it's going to fill the lines and the oil cooler with oil, but that oil has to come from somewhere, which is the engine. But by filling the oil cooler and the lines up with oil, that means there'll be less oil in the engine, which could lead to oil starvation, causing damage to the engine and the turbo. So, to prevent that, I've left one of the oil lines off, so I can prime or pre-fill the oil cooler lines and the oil cooler. That will prevent any airlocks and any oil starvation in the engine and turbo. So to do that, we need to put a little funnel in that oil line, and we need some oil. This is a fresh engine build with fresh bearings and fresh rings, which means it's probably not a good idea to put the normal engine oil straight in this. Instead, I'm going to be using some break-in oil. This is going to help the piston rings and the bearings seat into the engine nicely and help the engine break in without any excessive wear and tear. So I found myself a funnel that fits in that hose, put a bit of rag underneath, and now it's time to slowly fill it up. I just know I'm going to spill something. Well, it looks like it's full now. That oil's not draining in anymore, and you can't really see, but it has started coming out the other end where the sandwich plate is. And it has taken a good 700 mil, which just goes to show how much the engine oil level would have dropped when the oil thermostat opens. So it's a very good idea to prime your oil cooler. Now I've got to remove that funnel without making a huge mess and connect that hose up to the sandwich plate. Both lines are connected and tight, and I've tightened the sandwich plate up. The only thing left to do is reinstall the oil filter. So that is a MX5 19-row oil cooler all installed, with a custom bracket, pre-made braided hoses, and a Mishimoto thermostatic sandwich plate with an oil temperature sensor, all installed on the car. Now all that's left to do is put all of this back together, but that'll be at a later date once I've completed all the work back here, and fill the engine with oil. But I'm going to do all the fluids in the car all in one go at a later date. So that's all for now. So if this video helped you install your oil cooler on your MX5, let me know in the comments down below. As per usual, like, comment, share and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one.